let's roll.
All right, so yeah, we are recording. Thanks everybody for joining. I'm sure we'll have a few more people jump on as well, but my name is Alicia Drinky and I am the Dairy Management Specialist on the Southwest New York Dairy Livestock and Field Crops team. And this is our expert panel that I will have each of them do a little introduction of themselves in just a minute. But I do want to highlight Betsy Hicks, who has been my counterpart through this whole series. And she is the Dairy Management Specialist on the South Central Dairy and Field Crops team. We are recording, so you will have access to this recording at a later time. If you have questions throughout when we're answering things, feel free to either dump that into the chat box or the Q&A, or we have let you all have the capability to unmute. So also feel free to use that as well. I should, I guess, turn on our closed captioning, which you can turn off if you don't want to see. At the bottom of your screen, there should be a little CC button. If you don't want to see the subtitles popping up, you can shut those off. You just click that little CC button at the bottom of your screen and say that you don't want to see them. So with that, I do have a poll question to get us started and get a better idea of who our audience is, and then we'll have our panelists introduce themselves. We would like to know, where are you joining us from? Are you in New York State or another state in the US or outside of the US? And then which species do you graze? And you can select multiple. So are you grazing dairy cattle, beef cattle, goats, sheep, llamas, horses, chickens, or something else? And then also what part of the agricultural industry do you represent? So are you a producer, extension or academia, some sort of consultant, a veterinarian, or other?
There aren't any people on.
Okay. Let's give you another second or two to fill that out and get settled in.
While you're waiting, do you want to put Mary Kate so she can put her video on?
Oh, yes.
She came in on another one. Yeah.
Okay, Mary Kate, you should be good to go. Cool. Oh, wow. So we have lots of species represented. So panelist members, keep that in mind. Pretty much everything is represented by at least one person. So that's cool to see. Sorry, I have to close that out. Okay, so with that, I would like to have our panelists do a brief introduction of themselves. Share your name, what you do, and then kind of a 1-minute introduction about your qualifications and kind of your experience with grazing. And then also as like a fun little tidbit, what's your favorite part about grazing? And I will make Betsy go first because she's also serving as a panelist tonight. And I'll let her explain why.
I didn't pay attention to everything that you wanted me to say. All right, so my extension role. I've been with Extension since 2014. I'm fast approaching my anniversary date. Like, I think it's on the 16th. So it's been a fun ride. About the same time, I started rotationally grazing my beef herd. And I started with not as many mama cows as I have now. Now I have about 40 mama cows. Then we were probably about 20. And so with the expansion of the herd, I needed to do a lot better pasture management and needed to learn how to rotationally graze because I never had before. And so that's really how, like, the more I read, the more I practiced it, the more I realized, like, this is great stuff. The land we were on had been pretty much fallow, and it's really crappy hill ground. So it's suited for just pasture for the most part. But recently, Troy has come to visit, and we've done some paradigm shifting, I'll call it, where he's challenged me to think about the whole farm as a whole unit and not just hayfield and pasture. So I probably have the least amount of qualifications on the panel. However, I do have my own 2 cents to throw in along the way. So that's where I'm at. I don't know if I had all your answers, but there you go.
Good enough. We'll have Don go, and then Troy, and then Sam, and then Mary Kate. And Lindsay, you can follow us up at the end.
Hello, everyone. I'm a ruminant nutritionist, and I've been an independent nutritionist for over 25 years, mostly feeding dairy cows, but a little bit of everything. And I do have some herds. I have some 30, 40 cow herds that graze. And the largest herd that I have that's a grazer is 600 cows, and they graze about 200 of them. And I've got my own little place here where I've got 20 mama cows, and it's growing every year, 20 mama cows now. And I also board Holstein heifers for a local dairy. So similar to Betsy, we cleared this land, and it was extremely poor. I spent a year on a bulldozer cleaning this up, and it was neglected and poor, and we're slowly getting it into shape, but I'm limited on pasture acres. So my goal has been to be aggressive on cropping practices to maximize the amount of grass I can produce here.
Great. Troy, do you want to do a brief intro?
Good evening, young people. Troy Bishop here from the Outer Banks of North Carolina.
Vacation.
What I'm calling a good grazing plan. So I have to have a good grazing plan because I'm wearing multiple hats. So I get time off from my job at the Soil and Water Conservation Service in district. The Soil and Water Conservation District of Madison County, where I help farmers in their pursuit of good land management. Thanks, Betsy. And for about 25 or so years, I have been custom grazing cattle on my farm or other farms. And I'm also a writer, photographer. And today I'm a pop. And that's grandchildren days are good too. So just before the grass greens up here in another week or two, we plan to have a vacation. So I'm happy to be able to say, yes, the plan does work. Please have a grazing plan and enjoy life. One of my favorite things about the pasturing is seeing all these ebbs and flows of how planning implementation provide a better life. Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks, Troy. Sam, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Leisha. I lost track of the order. So I'm Sam Corcoran. I'm at UMass now, where I'm a postdoctoral researcher. We just started out some projects with AFT and soil health on dairy farms. I'm part of the extension crop, dairy, livestock, and equine team. And so yeah, that's a small state extension team for you. So we all are kind of got to be generalists. I'm also the Southern New England project coordinator for the New England Grazing Network. And so I work with farmers in Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts on kind of whatever comes up that they need for grazing support. And I think the thing that I like the most about grazing is it's such a puzzle, man. I mean, you just have to know, you got to know how to be a plumber and get water out, and you have to be an electrician and get your fences up, and you have to be a plant scientist and an animal scientist. And it is a challenge, and it's a fun puzzle to work on.
Yeah, that's great. Mary Kate.
Hi guys. So yeah, my name is Mary Kate, and I work with Betsy on the South Central New York Dairy and Field Crops team. I'm also Don Burkhardt's neighbor. We live not far from his spot here in Italy Valley outside Naples, New York. And my husband Leith is cooking me dinner and coming and standing like right outside the frame of the video. He manages the farm where we live, and we, he grazes 280 acres. We've got beef and sheep, and we are producing 100% grass-fed meats that we sell. All the beef is sold direct to customers, and then most of the lambs go through like a wholesaler. But so we're into grazing. We're really into grazing, and I guess my favorite thing is it's just really fun to move cows, and then in the short run, and then it's also really fun in the long run to see things change on the farm and see how the community of grasses and pasture plants changes, and see kind of some of the positive impacts over time. Oh, and I'm the number cruncher person on our team. So I'm the farm business management specialist, which means I like spreadsheets and numbers, and I like chasing my husband around trying to get him to write things down so we can analyze our system. I also just finished a yoga class, so I'm ready for to relax and have a good time tonight. So hopefully this can be some good informal discussion with everybody on the call.
You just plain like chasing him around, Mary Kate.
That's perfect. All right, our last panelist, Lindsay.
I'm also a regional dairy specialist, and I work on the North Country team up in Northern New York. My qualifications, I spent about 5 years working for industry, doing cow comfort assessments across the country, mainly on freestyle farms, but also some farms that utilize pasture and did grazing. And then for the last 5 years, I worked at Extension, and Betsy and I, in the last few years, did a project looking at tie-cell farms, mainly that utilized pasture. And so we worked with some farmers there looking at lameness. So I focus a lot on cow comfort, cow behavior, and lameness. The only thing I've attempted to graze are my 4 pygmy goats, and they didn't go well. They just have a little mud patch. And I guess my favorite part about cows grazing is obviously the first time they go out in the spring, and just like the total chaos and excitement.
That's perfect. Good. Well, I want to offer our attendees, before Betsy and I came up with a list of questions that we thought would be kind of good conversation starters and maybe be of interest to people on the call. But before I jump into those, I want to offer some time that if our attendees have questions that they specifically want answered, maybe we can start with those, or we can also come back to them if you don't have anything. So feel free to raise your hand if you have a question that you are dying to ask.
I'd also love to give the opportunity for people, if you want to introduce yourself and say where you're from and what your grazing situation is. It'd be super interesting to hear who else is on the call with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody want to unmute and share a little bit about their farm or?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Dan.
Yeah, this is Dan
Good to hear
Carey.
you.
I find this series, I've learned quite a lot, just what other people are doing and how people look at how they look at grazing from different aspects. But I do have a question for Don. he mentioned that he works with a 600 cow dairy and they graze 200 cows. I'm wondering, do they graze the 200 fresh cows or 200 tail ender cows?
No, in fact, that's a great question. That's a great question. He expanded last year and he bought a herd of Jerseys. And so we decided to graze the Jerseys and keep them separate while he was building an addition onto his barn. So we grazed Jerseys of all stages of lactation. And then we moved them into their own group in the barn. So currently we have a group of Jerseys and 2-year-olds and feed them differently.
Okay. I've often, my son and I, Eric, we've discussed, we've got 300 milking cows and we graze every one. The dry cows are separate. And if we're limited on pasture acres, whether it be more beneficial to just graze the 100 fresh cows or the 100 tail ender cows?
Yeah, so for me, that the answer to that would change throughout the year, I think. For starters, I really like grazing dry cows. I think it's really good to get them off of concrete and get them some exercise. I always think about if a woman just lays on a couch for 9 months before she has a baby or 3 months before she has a baby, she's not in very good shape to have that baby, to give birth. So I really like dry cows to get a bunch of exercise and have to chase their feed around as long as there's plenty of feed there. But early in the year, I loved grazing fresh cows. And that would probably change as the heat gets more intense and there is a energy cost to walking further distances. So I really don't know the answer of how I would do it through the year, So I guess maybe someone else, maybe Betsy or someone else has an idea on that one.
It's a curious question. And I'm right there with you, Don, that like the more we're walking, I don't know, we could model it out, Dan, and look at it that way and see what our energy costs are and see what milk production tells us it would be. It would be interesting to look at it that way. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I do agree with your dry cow thing, Don, but I don't think any of the women appreciated your reference on the couch.
Well, exercise is good, period. Right?
All of the women were stone faced.
Like, where's he going with this one?
So sorry.
You redeemed yourself once. I was like, lay on the couch for 3 months. What?
Yeah, that's my point. You wouldn't do that, right?
Sounds like that's all work from home is.
Staring at the pile of stuff behind us. Yeah.
Never cleaned it up.
Yeah, but no, I agree with you, Dan. Like I like getting dry cows out there. The exercise is always great for muscle tone and getting those ladies moving and off of concrete. Off of concrete. Like Lindsay talked about in her week. Lameness score improves when we get them off of concrete, whether, your herd has lameness or not, there's other benefits besides lameness score improvement. So yeah, I don't know, from milk production impact throughout the year, it might be different. So
I will say, Dan, those cows we were grazing, they were coming to the parlor twice a day, obviously. So we were supplementing them with corn silage and corn grain, so it was a high energy TMR with a little bit of fat in there that we were supplementing those cows with.
Okay. Does anybody else have a burning question that they want to ask, or do they want to introduce themselves a little bit more or anything? Okay. See, oh, Betsy, did you have something? Okay. One of the first questions that I want to ask goes to Sam, and all of our other panelists can feel free to chime in as well. But as you know, the weather's starting to get a little bit warmer. What do you think our plants out in the pasture are currently telling us? And maybe what should farms be looking for to identify this in their own pastures?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, I think right now our plants are telling us how they did this past winter. You know, you can right now see patches that don't look so good, and being looking brown or looking bleached out doesn't mean the whole plant is dead, right? You can have dead leaf blades, you can have dead tillers, and then you can have the whole plant be dead. And also right now, I think they're telling us that their rate of green up is telling us the condition they were left in last year, or the conditions they experienced over the winter. So for example, just in my own yard, there's a big area where it had a lot of foot traffic this year, and the snow melted, and then it froze, but the ground was still frozen, so we didn't get water infiltration, and it basically made like an ice skating rink. And I'm sure my husband's been nervous for. I'm like, this grass is gonna die. I can't wait. And but I'm like, this is gonna be such a good example this spring. And then there's another big patch that had really nice snow cover all year, and you know, just never got walked over. When it warmed up, because there was so much deep snow cover, it actually didn't melt in that spot. So can I screen share to show? So today I went out, and I don't know if you've ever heard of, wait, let me get us to a screen before I just share all willy-nilly, because who knows what's gonna come up. So there's this great app that I don't know if others have heard of called Canopeo, Canopeo. And you can use it to take a picture of your ground cover, and it'll convert it into like canopy cover, looking at what's green and what's dead. So I did that today, and I think it's nice to go to a spot that you look at and say, oh, that looks dead. And then use the app. And it's actually like, it's from Oregon State, and it's a super user-friendly app. But oh, I sorted emails by unread, and I read it, and now I can't find it. So it's developed by Oregon State, and it's actually, some people do use it for like research grade work, and it's also meant for users. So let me see. Hold on, bear with me. I feel like a young person until I try to go into my email, and then all bets are off. Okay, great. I got my screenshots. So share screen. Okay, so here's a spot where I knew, can you see that? Okay, so here's a spot where like I knew there was ice cover, and I know that it looks bad, and my canopy cover is 0.6%. And then I went over to another spot, and I'll show you the actual green pictures where I thought it looked good, and this is where there was good snow cover, and there's like a septic field, so there's water and nutrients, and it's at 22% cover. And so like these aren't that far apart, right? They're in the same microclimate. And so I think right now, like these areas are telling me two totally different things. And this simple app makes it easy for me to see what it's telling me. And then, oh, this is my dog giving me dirty looks. But so this here, you can see the areas where you can see in the background, I mean, it looks terrible. And this is where there was that ice cover. And but then if you like start to scratch back all of this grass, you can see a little bit of new growth just starting to come up. And so it's not totally dead, but so now, because I'm me, I'm going to track this probably throughout the spring, because I think it makes a good example of, you know, if your pastures do look a little beat up, you can track their rate of green up pretty easily. Also, just some other things. I hope my neighbors never see this, but I can tell one neighbor totally over fertilized in the fall because their whole yard is just wall to wall dead grass that ends where it hits their neighbors. And so I think, you know, and a lot of times we're told like, yeah, go ahead and fall fertilize. And especially in hay fields, and you know, you can get in a drought year like last year, you're more likely to get root burn. And I can see that somebody just did their regular fall nitrogen application or whatever they did and they killed it. And then across the street, I can see where a neighbor basically has horses in their yard and kind of treats them like big dogs. And again, it's just like wall to wall dead. And so, yeah, right now I think our grass is telling us really how did it do last year, but it's also telling our nosy neighbors how our grass did last year too. Okay, so that's all I got for my piece. I'll stop my screen share.
I just have like a follow-up question. So if folks are like looking out in their fields and they're seeing these like beat up areas, like what specifically do you think they should do aside from tracking it? Like, is there anything they can do in terms of like, I don't know, not putting cows on it, like managing around it? What would you suggest?
That's a great question. I'd look at it a couple of ways. I mean, I think if you have small patches, like a mattress sized patch, you know, like I wouldn't be so worried about that. But if you have entire paddocks that are looking kind of beat up, I mean, it could be a couple of things. So I'd recommend first trying to think about, okay, what were last year's conditions? And then what did this pasture see like over the winter? So do I know that I overgrazed this past winter? Maybe it's just going to need a little bit more turnover time to like re-up its carbohydrate stores this spring and build new tillers. Or do I know that like maybe it's in a spot where, you know, the wind blows all the snow off, and so it gets more exposed, and then that's what I'm going to, you know, in both cases, I would recommend like digging around and seeing if you see signs of growth. You can also do something called the tug test. And if you pull it and it comes up really easy, it suggests it's closer to dead than just dormant. But if there's a little bit of resistance, it suggests it's going to come back. And so I would make my plan. The reason I like monitoring this rate of green up is it's an indicator of development. I think sometimes we use development and growth interchangeably, but like, you know, a tall 5-year-old isn't more advanced than a short 5-year-old, right? So like their growth is different, but their development's the same. So I keep an eye on this rate of green up because that's going to give you an indication of, okay, I'm doing okay. I'm really greening up. But if you see slow green up and you see slow growth, then I would wait a little bit longer to graze it. And I would also aim to graze it quick and not put a lot of pressure, kind of a bite and move.
I got a question for you, Sam.
Yeah.
So when I left, my fields were covered in snow, kind of like last year in a way, but they were greening up. And so when I get home, they're going to be more green and growing, as my guess is. So what is the they're greening up? What's the bottom end temperature to keep us moving in a growth rate, a positive growth rate? Is it 55? Because I'm worried again that I don't know. This week was great, and then next week it's going to snow again, and then we're going to have 20s and snow, and then I'm going to bring on cows, and that same scenario as last year is going to play out, where I wait too long, and I should have got them out sooner. What's the lowest, or what's your prediction based on what you know we can get an early growth rate?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the soil temp that these plants really like is like this 55 to 60 root temperature. And then the ambient temperature, they can go as high as like, you know, maybe 60 to 70. And so they like their leaves to be warmer than their roots, which totally makes sense because soil is also a great insulator. And so even though it's getting warmer, you know, the roots stay cooler. And so I think right now, I think we'll actually be okay if, well, I'm not exactly sure how it is for you in New York, but I mean, also if you're curious, you know, you could get a soil thermometer and I need to figure out what the bottom limit of my meat thermometer is and see if I can just use that. But yeah, I would focus more on soil temperature. And if you're in that 55 to 60 window, that's going to be good for root growth and root nutrient uptake. And that's going to feed into that aerial growth, even if it's a little cooler than you might like. But I just read the NOAA report today that came out in late March. And I don't know if anyone else has seen that, but it looks like really good news. They predict that the Northeast New England Great Lake drought is going to end. Yeah, that we're going to have, regular rainfall, and that there's going to be, fairly warm temperatures. And so I think we just might, I'm not a weather person because I don't have the confidence to make these predictions, but I think we just might have really good spring conditions where the water helps stabilize the soil temperature because we're getting that rainfall. And then we have that ambient air temperature so that roots and shoots will both be happy. So Troy, I think your grass is going to grow fast. Does that answer your question?
Good grass, good money.
Yeah, you're going to be taking one bite and moving for sure.
Yep. That's my plan.
Sam, can you put that app in the chat, please?
Yeah, you bet. And it's free too.
Awesome.
So we usually don't see 60-degree soil temperatures till June, late May, early June in New York, where we are.
Yeah, I mean, they'll go as low as 55. Do you know when you hit 55?
No, I don't. And part of the reason is I check for some of the annuals I plant, and the minimum 60. So it's usually very late in May by the time we hit 60 in the top 3 or 4 inches, 2 inches.
Got it. Yeah, we can hit, I guess it's just so variable. That's just your top first 2 inches.
Yeah, where the seeds would be planted. So the top 2 or 3 inches.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, that's good news insofar as, sorry, I'm multitasking looking for the app. Good news insofar as it sounds like then you must have good growth longer, because once it gets above that 60 temperature, the growth really slows down.
Okay.
Thanks, Sam.
Maybe a dumb question, but do dandelions kind of indicate what soil temperature is when they dandelions come out?
They indicate how many growing degree days, and I should know this, but I got there's a local guy that tracks growing degree days and when the dandelions would flower. So that is strictly based on growing degree days. John Winchell is his name, and you might be able to look him up and find some of the stuff he's been doing tracking growing degree days.
I just talked to John yesterday, and I am on his weekly email list. So Hold on, I'll look it up right now.
Well, and so he's given me dates for dandelions for years now. I'm like, John, I don't need that, but he's got a bunch of good data.
Okay, thank you.
So Alicia, we can go to another question.
Perfect. Let's flop to the cow side of things for a minute. And Lindsay, if you're still with us, what do you think is the best place for grazing farms to start improving cow or herd comfort and reduce lameness on their farm this year?
I guess the first step would be and we talked about this during the lameness segment, is
I think we lost you for a second, Lindsay. The choice of technology.
While we're waiting for Lindsay to come back, I found the stuff from John on the dandelions. And when we're looking at growing degree days, so I like to use the Cornell Climate Smart Farming app which is a website right online, and you can track by your location. And so like I did a whole bunch of digging, and there's certain parts in Western New York that are really, really far ahead of normal. Right now for McGraw, where I live, we're right on average. So John uses base 32 for looking at dandelions, and about 260 is when we'll start seeing the early bloom, or just seeing the head of the dandelion start. About 300 is when we'll see bloom, 316-ish. Early seed will be about 4 1/4. And when we see them go to fluff is about 500. Nope, that was base 0. Wrong line. So sorry. 5, that wasn't making sense in my brain either. And Sam, I know you're laughing at me. Sorry, that was base 0.
No, I mean, come on. Growing degree days always throws me through a loop. So
Yeah.
I'm laughing because I feel you.
Yeah, no, sorry. We're going to cut that part out. No, 500 is when we start seeing early bloom. Bloom is at 600. Early seed is at 800. And seed, where we see the fluff, is at 900. Base 32. There we go. So it's really interesting. We're tracking that with first cutting for grass for haylage harvest. And John's got me hooked on this. I love looking at it for harvesting quality haylage and first cutting. So we can walk down a rabbit hole any day on that with John. I love listening to him. And Sam, I would love for you to talk to John too.
Oh, I would as well. I would love to talk about dandelions, but also just a quick sidebar. I just put in another tool that gives you an estimate of your soil temperature. They use it for like disease and weed forecasting. And so I looked at Amherst, Mass, which is where campus is located. And our 10-year average for April 6th for today is 43 degrees. But today's average, according to this, I think it's a prediction model, I don't think they're actual data centers, is 53 degrees. So that could be a nice tool, because I think it's also, we're going to find it, changing, and climate change, and, all of these things, drier springs, soils warm up faster.
I just put into the chat the Climate Smart Farming growing degree calculator tool, which is what I use when I do the first cutting updates. And you can go in by your location and see whether you're base 32 or base 50, whatever you want to look at for corn or grass, not 0.
No.
Yes, we can hear you now, Lindsay.
Okay, so I guess the first step would be to measure your leanness and get an idea of what's causing it. So what types of leanness you're dealing with, and then we can try to figure out what's causing it. And looking kind of at the time budget, so maybe splitting it in half and looking at if there's any time your cows are spending inside, let's make sure they're able to lay down as much as they want and as comfortably as they want inside. So if you are utilizing stalls at all, what do those stalls look like? Making sure there's enough bedding, making sure those stalls are big enough for our cows. A lot of times now they're not, because our cows have gotten bigger over time and our stalls haven't really gotten bigger. And then on the other hand, looking at the time she's spending outside. So how far does she have to walk? Can we make some improvements to laneways? Minimizing how far she's walking, or being strategic about which cows we're putting outside. So the question earlier, dry cows or fresh cows. And then, trying to minimize any sort of potential areas of injury, so rocks and things like that. So I guess kind of just taking a step back and kind of just looking at the whole system.
Perfect. Does anybody else have thoughts or comments on that question? Okay. Mary Kate, we're gonna put you on the spot next. So what are the most profitable grazing herds doing to get to that kind of upper level? Or what do you see, like all these really profitable grazing herds, what do they have in common? And maybe what should producers be looking to do to be really profitable when they're grazing?
Thanks, Leah. I think my husband is very interested to hear what I'm going to say in response to your question. And I'm just going to throw up this slide, kind of a redo from my presentation. So as an economist, my first response would be, well, let's go look at the data. Let's look at economic data from grazing farms and see what factors, what management factors are correlated with high profit farms. To the best of my knowledge, that data, at least current data, examining that question in detail is not particularly available. And so I don't, from like a number crunching perspective, I don't have a magic answer or a list of things that to tell you that all of the most profitable grazing dairies do this. But we do know in theory and a little bit in practice from some of this older data, what are the factors that help grazing dairies to outperform conventional dairies. And so I would say that that the farms that are successful and profitable are able to capitalize on all of these things that in theory should help them. They're able to control their costs, and they're able to take advantage of the grazing system to reduce their costs, both their operating costs and cost of feed, as well as the total amount they have invested per animal. And they're also able to capitalize on labor efficiency benefits of the grazing system. The other thing that I'll say that's like, I think sort of a key consideration that is maybe hasn't really been explored, like an area for research in the future. And I don't know, maybe Sam or Don, like maybe you guys know more about what's out there, but I think, you know, with grazing dairies, the pasture is just one of the sources of feed that we're utilizing with our animals. So there's a huge range of flexibility when we are determining what is the appropriate stocking rate for our pastures, how many cows per acre or how many acres per cow do we want in our grazing system, and how are we going to complement that in the barn. And I think part of what makes it so complicated is that every farm has different resources for grazing and for feeding their cows. And so the costs of stored feed, to one farm is different than the cost of stored feed to another. But I think that farms that are successful and profitable in their grazing system are finding the right balance between the stocking rate on the grazing system and the supplementation in the barn, so that they're still making milk. They're not giving up too much milk in exchange for reducing some of their costs in the pasture system. So those are my 2 cents, but I would love to hear other people's thoughts on that as well.
Mary Kate, I have a question for you. So something that I see with some of our big dairies, and I think big in Massachusetts is probably medium in New York. But something that we see is they have so much in capital investments, especially in equipment, when they're not grazing, when they're still in kind of a traditional corn silage and hay system, that I think it's a hard idea for them, because they're thinking, I still have payments on this, and there's interest or whatever. Mm-hmm. So how do you see people making those economic decisions to step away from their big like equipment investments or silos or whatever in order to get into more of a grazing direction?
So Sam, that's a great question. And I have been working in the dairy industry for, I don't know, maybe 3 years now. So I don't have a ton of experience in this industry, but in that time, I have not seen a single conventional dairy transition to grazing. And I think, there was a big burst in interest in grazing probably like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, like in the 90s. This is where like somebody like Troy should probably jump in and get into the history of this a little bit.
Yeah, the old guy.
But I think like it is hard for farms once they've gone down a path of commitment to certain capital investments, then they need to sustain a level of production to support that, to pay it off. So it is hard to change course. And I don't know a lot of models or examples for how that's been done. But I could also throw that ball to Dan Carey, who's on this call, because he probably has a story of transitioning from conventional to grazing on his dairy too.
So Mary Kate, those comments are excellent, and I only know one large dairy over towards Perry that sold all their equipment and went strictly grazing, and the cows are outside all year round, and they do not milk cows during the winter months. They're seasonal calving, seasonal grazing, and that has worked very well for them. Part of the key here, I think, is low inputs, and if you're going to be strictly grazing, you can't own a chopper and all the other equipment that goes along with harvesting forages too. Now on this set of slides is interesting because again, the old guy, those years were really low milk price years generally, and maybe there was a year or two in there, but I had guys that almost went out of business in 09 because there was a series of low milk price years through that time. And I wonder how the price of milk plays into these costs that you're sharing.
I would just say that my motivation was back in the late 90s. There was a big push on grazing dairies. I think people were looking for an alternative to the higher milk price seemed to be an incentive for people to graze and become organic. But at that time, I think a lot of it goes into how close by your land is and the size of your herd. And we were fortunate in that we had 50 acres right behind our barn that was in strip crops at the time, and I had a chance to seed down the corn strips and leave the hay strips there. So for the cost of a perimeter fence and water system, I thought that wasn't going to put me out of business. If I could just try this and see how it goes. So my wife and I made that plunge, and I think key to it is we don't have to cross any highways with the cows, and all our land is 50 acres that I graze continuously, or I go to first, and then we got another 50 or 60 acres they try to take a hay crop off most of it before we and then we go in and start building temporary fence to go to that in June, when the continuously where we've 50 acres of continuously grazing slows down. And like I said, we've got that land available. It's close to the barn, and I think that's key. There's a lot of big dairies that are too big, and they don't have that land base close by to graze their herd. They might be able to graze a percentage of their herd or part of the herd, but and at the same time, a disincentive is your milk tank's probably going to drop a little, and that scares people more, dairymen, more than anything else. In my experience.
So I got an opinion, because I've seen over my 30 some years that farmers are too optimistic about their grazing ability or their grass swords, their forage base. And so the folks that I work with or know, they rely too much on the pasture. They need to feed their cows. You know, they're not realistic. You know, I've seen cows being thrown out and a couple inches of grass and for days on end. I mean, you've lost your mind. And so common sense sort of went out the window a little bit, and then the right sizing got a little out of skew. And at least almost 99% of all soil tests on pasture I've ever seen wouldn't even would make a corn farmer blush. They're so terrible. So you're asking a lot from the system, but you're hardly putting anything back. And so once you go down that rabbit hole, there's no coming back. I mean, and so investing in management, fertility, and those types of things that crop farmers do, it will be well served on a dairy farm also. And what I keep seeing is there's some mindset. I don't know. I've sort of argued and to almost to no avail that so many folks think that they can put the cows out to pasture, the cows can eat the grass and poop and pee, and that's somehow sustainable. Like you don't take enough off, and with the cows eating and pooping, it's all good. And I cannot agree with that. Because that fertility base, if you were fully fertilized and ready to go, that might be one thing, but these pastures, you can't operate on 5.5 pH or not investing in anything. And so the rabbit hole keeps going, the production goes lower and whatever. And a lot of guys and gals ended up in a wreck. And once you get in a wreck, you don't want to go in another wreck. And I've definitely heard some people get down on grazing, and when you look at it a little closer, they didn't invest in the right types of things. And yeah, and then the price sucks. Plain and simple. The price of milk is Dan knows well, and so do I. I lived through the 80s and the 90s, and I sold out because the price of milk sucked. And it doesn't matter that I thought I did a good job grazing. Nothing can kill your profit other than $10 milk. I mean, it's not profitable. It doesn't matter if you're grazing or you're conventional not grazing. When the milk is so low that it can't cover your cost of production, that's when we decided to stop milking cows. Okay, my 2 cents.
Thanks for that, Troy. So Don, I know that there was a lot of interest in your talk and how you kind of got into grazing with annuals. So can you remind us where you first started when you started using annuals, and then what kind of brought you to that decision? And is there somewhere different that you would start knowing what you know now? So if somebody's interested in incorporating annuals on their farm, where would you suggest they potentially start?
So I started with annuals probably over 15 years ago. And part of it was just some smaller Mennonite guys that had moved up from PA and were using rye or triticale or spelts as a cover crop. And we got in situations where we said, hey, that's beautiful feed. Let's try it. So we started feeding those, and cows performed so well on them. I started talking about those forages to all my dairies. And as through that period of time, price of land to own and to rent has continued up. I work with some dairies now that are paying $300 an acre for land rent. So, it kind of evolved into maximizing our land, the use of, the forage we could produce off of our land, maximizing the use of manure on the land. So that's how it got started. And then when we started farming here, I been talking about annuals for so many years. Of course, I was going to just grow annuals on my place. And it's helped me understand or learn some of the shortcomings with annuals and some of the disappointments, maybe in yield wise. But it's also helped me learn how to maximize forage quality and forage production. And I can, my guys that I work with all grow annuals to some degree now, whether they graze them or harvest them. And it's, we've helped each other out and helped each other improve forage quality and improve the percentage of forage in these diets. I've got some herds now that are consistently 75% forage and just, making 90 plus pounds of milk with great components. And it's the digestibility of these annuals that allows us to do that. So I'm raising Holstein heifers and Angus cows and calves, and my cows are ridiculously fat. They really don't need those annuals. But I'm committed to it, and we grow some really, really nice calves. So I don't mind my girls being a little bit fat out there. The first year I did that, I was in a panic because I fed them annuals all year and they went to calve in the spring, and I thought I was going to have dead cows everywhere. But these beefers can handle that fairly well, I guess. So, I just think there's the quality and the tonnage on limited acres really helps produce milk on lots of forage. I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Don, do you work the ground and plant those annuals in the fall? You rip the ground up and plant it, or how do you go about that?
Yeah. So Dan, I've been trying to figure out what the best way to do this is. And my ground here, it was literally 30 years of trees growing on it when we moved here. So I have ripped the ground up and tried to level things up a little bit and incorporate lime and eggshells and fertilizer. But at this point, my goal is to not till the ground anymore. And so I'm no tilling in. So last year, what I did was I had Italian ryegrass, clover, and Sudan grass. And I went across it 2 times, either grazing it or mowing it. And I drilled triticale directly into that with a no-till drill mid-August. And so now, and then I grazed it again or mowed it again it was probably late October when we went across that the last time. And I was worried I'd hurt my triticale by grazing it. I didn't let them, I went through pretty fast, so I didn't let them chew it down to nothing. But I've got a heck of a crop of triticale out there now and some Italian ryegrass that was seeded last year. So my goal is to, from here on out, to just continue to no-till once or twice a year into those fields.
Hey, Don, do you have on your, let's say your 3 most popular annual mixes, do you have a per acre expense per putting these annuals in?
I did in my talk, and I don't know those numbers off the top of my head. Triticale is the least expensive of those because you can grow a crop of that and harvest it for straw and save the seed. You can't sell it by the rules of the seed business, but you can plant your own triticale seed. That's what I did last year. So the cost of planting 100 pounds of triticale is maybe $15. So that's extremely low. I did spend, I think off the top of my head, maybe $60 an acre to plant Sudan grass, Italian ryegrass, and clover last summer.
That's just the seed cost, or is that the equipment and all the whole deal.
That was seed and equipment. That does not, and I own my own equipment, but I still figure that in. You know, it's custom no-till drilling is about $30 an acre.
Okay.
So, you know, that would, I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember those numbers exactly, but there is a cost to this. Yeah, so it's not the least expensive way to go, but you can rival corn silage for tons per acre of very high quality forage.
So Don, how, in the spring, when you send the cows out into that triticale mix with a, they graze that down, you have an orchard grass and base that comes through? Will that Italian ryegrass push stuff out so that your established pastures don't have a chance to grow?
The orchard grass is always there to some extent, which is really nice actually. But those fields that I've got those mixes in, I did till originally, and there's very little orchard grass in there. There has been some native orchard grass that came in. I have drilled triticale into an existing orchard grass field. And I had that as an example in my talk, and that was, the yields were, I would say probably 4+ tons of dry matter per acre on those, and the digestibility and the quality was really, really high. But I'm also putting, you know, the discussion about fertility and lime is really important, you know. So I just spread 90 pounds of nitrogen per acre and 15 pounds of sulfur per acre. So I am feeding these things too.
Yeah, that's what I've been putting nitrogen, Super U, and ammonium sulfate on the last 2 days. Is it too late this spring to go in and no-till triticale into an established pasture?
There is a spring triticale, but I have no experience with that, and I really don't know. There might be a better option. Talking to a couple of seed guys and some of the agronomists that I work with on farms, they suggest that rather than do something like that this time of year, to go in with an Italian ryegrass, and that'll be established early and give you better tonnage through the year. The disadvantage to Italian ryegrass is if we get a really dry year like we had last year, you are not going to get a lot of feed off of that.
And I wouldn't want to, it sounds like your interest was in seeding triticale into established pastures already. And I never want to discourage anyone from trying anything. We've done a lot of work with triticale. And I think for us in New England, and obviously our soils are different, but the general consensus has been that trying to drill, even no-till drill with weight on it into established pastures has had pretty poor establishment, and it has been a big challenge.
I would agree. There isn't, it doesn't establish as well if you've got a real thick sod, especially, you know, a real heavy orchard grass sod with a bunch of clover and stuff. It's there. And I did another one last fall on a low fertility ground, chunk of ground that was all goldenrods and stuff. And it's there, but it's way behind the rest of my triticale.
Yeah. Don, I'd be interested in your thoughts on, so something I'm big on is using the different annuals to fill in bald patches in perennial pasture, you know, like maybe there was a waterer there, or you just got winter kill in a spot. Is that something that you've tried, and you know, until you can reseed it later with a perennial?
I have not tried that, and it totally makes sense. And so I guess I would consider what the reason is for the bare spot. If it's a wet spot, you know, maybe you go in with an Italian ryegrass and a mix of perennials. to take care of that. If it's a knoll that's really dry, then maybe something else, Sudan grass, sorghum Sudan grows, that likes dry conditions better than some of the other ones. Triticale seems to always grow.
That's the rye in it.
It is, you're right. And maybe you just use rye.
Yeah. That's not a half bad idea. It's cheaper too.
It is. That's right.
I've been growing triticale for 5 or 6 years now on corn ground as cover crop, and then we harvest it in the spring. We bale it and wrap it. And this year we put rye, 40 acres of triticale and 140 acres of rye on all of our other corn ground, and we're hoping to harvest as much of that as possible for feed. Usually do the triticale, but we're going to try and go after the rye this year.
So
It
Dan,
makes super feed.
I have several dairies that harvest rye, and it works really, really well. And the tonnage is excellent. The window's shorter than triticale is the issue with ryegrass or annual rye. Yeah. So I think you'll be happy with that.
Yeah, well, we have been in the past. Last year we tried to introduce more diversity into our paddocks. And so we bought a mix, and we went in with a spinner on the back of a four-wheeler ahead of the cows in the paddocks, and spread in, get some more legumes into the mix and some ryegrass. And it was so dry last year, we really didn't see the benefits of that. I spread it on hoping the cows would walk it in. And I don't know if we'll see if we'll see it this year, or if it's gone. It was so dry last year.
Yeah, don't feel bad, because
that?
I drilled mine in and it did the same thing. So
Dan, that the ryegrass and growing degree days, like that is kind of my pet project for this upcoming weeks. And John Winchell really got me revved up about it. So Sam, maybe I can include you on some of this too. This is so interesting. But what I'm putting together, Dan, I can send to you, and I'll track your area too, because I'll be tracking my rye too.
That's good to hear. Thanks, Betsy.
Yeah, no problem.
Perfect. Well, Troy, we want to hear a couple more thoughts from you. So what are you doing with farms right now to get them set up for spring grazing? And what should farms be doing over the next 2 months to make sure that they have a successful season?
So right now, at least as the professional on the ground, because of COVID, we've been discouraged from visiting farms, but since things are lifting, we're getting back out in the field and trying to, as Mary Kate talked about, balance. And so what has been a little heartbreaking is when last year's drought happened, or dry weather, dry period, wherever you were in it, there was very little talking. There was very little discussion, vetting ideas. When you're in those hard times, you don't talk because it might not be very fun to talk about not growing a lot of grass, or maybe you don't want to put yourself out there. And so this time, based on last year, I get to look at the land again and see how the green up is coming, and then meet with farmers to figure out when they can graze and what the balance is. And so again, I say a majority of farms are overstocked, and that's based on what they want to graze. They're not overstocked in the conventional sense. They're overstocked based on what's actually out there. and it's very difficult, and I'm a farmer myself, and it's very difficult to suggest to a farmer to lower his stocking expectations when he has bills to pay and everything else. And so the decision making for me is the place we need to go. If I have anything to say, is again, I'm going to go back to the planning a little bit, but that ongoing decision making of, okay, let's just say that you're overstocked, or let's say you're stocked correctly, but your grass looks like crap, right? It's not doing well. And you could blame the weather, you can blame yourself, you can blame a lot of things, but it's not well. And so lower your expectations. There's nothing wrong with that. And I go back to I'll keep plugging Mary Kate. It's about the money. And I feel better now than I have in a while, because I would be just before I left, I bought two loads, two big loads, gooseneck loads of hay, and I put it in the barn before I left. And having that resilience in the barn is huge. And I had the money to pay for it, which is even better. And so what that continues to play out is I don't have to do I'm not forced to do stuff I don't want to do. And so again, what I'm seeing is herds that their pastures don't look great and they don't have a lot of feed. To me, that spells disaster. And I don't know how to stop that. All I know is how to make aware of it, and then, do some praying that the grass is going to, we're going to get that average year, the rain is going to come, and things will all be well. The pessimist in me says that's not good planning. That hope it's going to get better, it's not a good plan. And so again, I'm the eyes on the ground that see this, and it's hard to convince folks that it's not as good as it seems. So that's sort of where I'm at. What was the second part of that? What is the so in our work, when we make good decisions, we're trying, it's good that we make money. And when we make money, the environment is better. So it keeps coming back to money in my estimation. And if you want to start off better, it'll continue right on through the season. If you start off not so good, it's going to haunt you, especially your resilience with this weather thing. If you don't get the average and your swards are really tired from last year and not fertile, I don't know where you go from this. So, I'm a little cautious. I'm optimistic because it's warm and it's sunny and everything is good. But honestly, our snow load left way too early. And so that already has my hackles up that it's going to be another weird year. And so I'm glad to hear someone say, I think it's going to be average. Okay, I'll take that. But I can't guarantee that it's going to be average. And so now I have to start formulating this battle plan week by week. And that's where these, I think Betsy and I are going to try to work together, or we're all going to try to work together on what are the growth rates in your area. And so when someone gets on, just like growing degree days, someone says, oh, what's the growth rate over there in Deansboro? And I can say, well, it's a ½ an inch a day. Okay. And Betsy, hers are a ¼ of an inch, or maybe hers are 2 inches. That gives us a month's plan. And as farmers, grazers, we don't do a lot of this measuring. We kind of take it, we don't actually go out and measure. And so we can't predict. But if I know that it's a half an inch a day, Don can say how much his annuals are growing. You know, it's a guarantee. It's a half an inch a day in 20 days. You know, you're gonna have 10 inches of forage. That's good inventory management, and that's management. That's what us managers should be doing.
That's perfect. Well, I want to recognize that we only have about 9 minutes left of our allotted time. So before I kind of pose a wrap-up question to our panelists, I want to make sure that any of the audience questions got answered. If anybody has any last-minute questions that they want to ask, feel free to. I see a hand raised. Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Troy was down to my farm back when Troy was young. That's how long ago we started grazing. But I would like to make a comment, a couple of them, but one especially is, I think the biggest mistake grazers make, and farmers in general, you have to treat your pastures like cropland. And nobody does, nobody did, and very few do today. But we are really lucky or successful because we've done that. We got in on the early grants. We put a lot of lime down and stuff where some of the pastures were never limed. And they were a pH of 5 and even a couple 4s. So, but we've done that a long time. And that's really made the difference for us to where we can graze, you know, all season long without having to supplement them. And I think people need to look at that far more seriously than they do because, you know, money is tight and I understand that and we're guilty too. And we've used a lot of different things, but that's really helped. And the only other comment you talk about seeding, and I kind of learned this from another guy, not me, so I won't take the credit for it, but he always puts grass seed on top of his manure spreader loads. And he respreads in the pasture. If he spread manure, he puts grass seed down with it. Now we've done that in the last couple of years on our hay fields. And that really seems to take, especially not your early season, but like Timothy and that, do take better than where you're applying at. We just figure out the ton of acre of manure per acre and the pounds of grass seed, and we just sprinkle it on each load. Kind of a neat little thing, but it does work. And the only other thing we do is we do frost seed a lot of clover in the pastures. And that's the one crop that really takes off and you get your money's worth out of it because it's easy and even on poor ground it takes. So that's all I have, but thank you.
Thank you.
When you said that you have to treat your pastures like cropland, my heart felt the way that it feels when my hometown team gets a touchdown and it's the Cleveland Browns. So that's a big feeling. I totally agree. I'm gonna look up this recording and like take out that sound bite and play it again in the future.
Thank you.
My hometown team thing was, sorry, Troy, you said something inadvertently like so mind-blowing. That was wonderful. So I harp on my farmers about inventory. Like you have to have inventory. Like as a nutritionist, it would drive me crazy when constantly we were running out of haylage and we'd have to feed more corn silage and then we have to flip-flop all the time. Inventory, major thing. Our pasture has an inventory as well, and we have to manage our pasture inventory. And whether you meant to say that or not, like it just made a huge correlation between the two to me. So I think, you know, you've got me convinced. I'm going to be measuring my pasture inventory, my growth rates this year. Absolutely. And we'll see who else I can talk into it. So,
Cool.
Yeah.
No, that's perfect. And I think that's a good way to wrap up, Betsy, that I would invite any of our panelists or attendees to share something that they either want to try this year or something they're thinking about, or just something that they found really interesting, or something you really want to hammer home. If you want to share something, would love to hear it, or you can also say that it's super late at night and everybody just wants to get off Zoom, which is also totally fair.
Well, for me, I've got to leave where I'm at, but it would be nice to continue this communication. Again, good, bad, or indifferent. Farmers are proud, and it would be nice to again maybe be the vetters of maybe not so good news or whatever, or what's actually happening on the ground, so we can, get some support. Because last year was kind of a rough year. And again, we're learning lessons every day, but we're sharing them a year later. In the heat of the battle, sometimes it'd be nice to share them. So I encourage you to, Zoom is a decent, I've learned a lot from Zoom actually. But at 8 o'clock at night with a cold beer on the couch, and maybe there's a rain shower, would be a great time for a Zoom to update, how's it growing, these types of things. Everyone on the call here has something to contribute from their area, or something you've learned in the last few weeks. So I would encourage to keep it up. Especially in the grazing pasture realm. The field crop guys, they got plenty of support, but us grazers, maybe we get fall through the cracks a little. So I gotta go give a 2-year-old a kiss goodnight. So appreciate your time, and thanks for having all of us on this call.
Thank you, Troy.
I'd just like to second that. For Troy, I think this is a benefit once a month if we just got on at the right time and shared our experiences going forward. One thing I was going to add to Troy that was a great observations that he made. And one of the observations that I found people make comments to me is, how come you don't have your cows out yet? And that can be a game changer from this very start if you get them out too soon. And I've had people ask me, why aren't your cows out? And I said, because the grass isn't ready. And you got to understand where where you're coming from. But thanks for the evening. Good talk.
Thanks, Dan. I am for sure going to be picking your brain as we go forward to what this might look like. So yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Perfect. Well, yeah, if anybody has anything else they want to share, but it seems like maybe
I think we're good.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for your time, and we will be in touch as we move forward, and we will send out the recording as well as the materials to all the previous talks in case you missed anything. And thank you again for joining us, and have a great rest of your evening and enjoy the good weather coming.
Thanks.
Night, everyone. Bye.
Everybody.
Thanks, Alicia. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mary Kate.